Speaking of which, sort of big companies and the big challenges, let's talk a little bit about Boomi. And I will go on record to start with, and I want to hear your take on this. But I I have tuned Boomi out until maybe the last year or two.
Mhm.
It's like they when they were acquired by Dell, and we've talked about this, when these big companies acquire these, that's sort of where they go to die, and that's sort of what Dell Boomi was, right? It was just like, yeah, they're there, but
Mhm.
whatever. Nobody's paying any attention any longer. And then the last couple of years, I went to an event 2 years ago. I think honestly it was at a rooftop here in New York City, and I just wanted to go to that rooftop. It's the only reason I showed up.
Sure.
But I was talking to some of the Boomi folks, and I was like, oh, they're going some of the right directions. I like that. And so I've been following them a little bit more closely for the last couple of years. And I think it's culminating in this announcement. So I'll let you kind of walk us all through it. But I will just set the stage that I've been sort of a detractor historically, or at least the last, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. And I was actually really intrigued and pleased by what I heard out of them coming out of this announcement. So you were there. What was your take?
Yeah, so I've covered Boomi pretty deeply over the past decade or so. They've been a market leader in iPaaS integration platform as a service for a long time, competing against everybody from Workato to Informatica to SnapLogic. All the usual suspects in that application integration world, and they've been doing an okay job of it, but they've struggled to figure out where to go next. A couple years ago, a lot of that changed when they brought Steve Lucas on board. So Steve Lucas, former high-ranked SAP executive, then CEO at Marketo, obviously has been successful at each stop that he's been, growing his business, and now he's here at Boomi. So they came out with both an interesting vision and a couple of announcements that ended up being fairly meaningful. First of all, Boomi wants to be the business connectivity platform and realizes that application integration is not enough. And in that light, they announced a couple of acquisitions in the API management space. The first being a company called APIIDA, which is a control plane for managing various API gateways. And then the second one being the Mashery assets. So for those of you with a long memory, Mashery used to be the hottest company in terms of talking about APIs. A decade ago, everybody wanted to be like Mashery in terms of how you managed APIs. And then they got acquired by Intel and they kind of disappeared. And then they kind of got acquired. And then they got acquired by Tibco. And then, Tibco has been going through its own private equity issues. And honestly, Mashery is kind of a shadow of what it used to be. But there's still this long background of managing APIs. So this gives Boomi a head start in moving forward in managing APIs. So Boomi realizes, okay, we're going to have application integration. We've already been doing web data. Now we have this API piece. And then they also are interested in the future of data management and AI agent management. They see themselves as a control plane to be able to connect all of these all these areas where you have a lot of choices, and then Boomi can be your one source of connectivity. So it's an ambitious plan, but a little bit like ServiceNow, Boomi is starting to say, well, we have all these partners. We had all these partners across API management, data management, AI management, and now we're going to have to kind of go against them for us to be able to grow and to be able to manage, take full advantage of our own application integration capabilities and our current business.
Yeah. So I will say I draw this as a sharp contrast to the sort of service now. I think the same challenge, but I think the circumstances are different. I think that when we're talking about this data integration layer, it is really hard to have it disjointed. So
Mhm.
so I'm apparently big on taglines this week. So in their tagline, they're talking a lot about integration automation, or how they're describing themselves in these announcements. And I think that's super, super important and super, super smart. That it just isn't just about the abstraction that an integration has historically been. They're also making a case in here that this is really, in this AI economy, as they're referring to it, which I think is a fair description,
Mhm.
that there's all this fragmentation, and that the enabler is in fact your ability to have a cohesive data layer and data pipeline that allows you to actually apply. You can't apply AI on top of crappy data. And this is a very significant issue. And I think they're smartly recognizing that it's not just about the traditional way we've approached data integration. And so, I look at this, and I mean, in this announcement, they talked about sort of three different pieces: API management, AI agents, and like a data management layer. And I think it is so smart and so critical because it is actually addressing the real challenges that organizations are facing. Is that I have to be dealing with all these APIs, and right now they've normally been shuttled off to this obscure API team someplace that has done, it's been whack-a-mole kind of an approach.
Mhm.
I'm not sure that it's quite as unique as maybe they're carving out. There are definitely some players like Postman and SmartBear and others that are doing a lot of innovative things in API management, but it is a critical piece. And the big distinction is that those guys that's all they're doing, right? So here you're
Mhm.
combining it with a core data integration platform. And then they add some of the data management capabilities around, MDM and some of these other pieces of it, which I think is super critical, that I can now have like a governance layer that I can start baking into this. And this idea of AI agents that you can start actually applying some intelligence in a very smart way. And here's the other thing I love, and we're going to talk about this with Red Hat in a second. One of the growing trends we're starting to see is that people are finally getting off the "it's all Gen AI" hype thing, and
Mhm.
they're talking here about this AI agents are combining elements of both Gen AI and predictive AI components together to provide some autonomous actions, and yes, provide a conversational layer maybe, but just really interesting stuff that's actually solving the real problems, and not just, oh, look at, we've got a conversational agent that can do something. And so I think it's a super smart approach, very cohesive, hangs together, solves real problems. So I loved it. I mean, it's always gonna come down to the execution, but the fact that they got this, I think, so right, sets them up well going forward.
Yes, and I got to talk to some of the executives at Boomi World, and it's interesting. I found that across the board, they were all very invested in the idea of agentic AI. Not a surprise, since they are talking so much about managing agents and saying, yes, you might have 30, 40, 50 agents at the end of the day, and you need to know which ones to talk to and which ones to use for specific use cases. We want to be the connectivity layer between them. That makes a whole lot of sense. But they also said, but we can't bring ourselves to use the phrase agentic AI yet in our marketing because it's just such a buzzword, which I can't disagree with. Like, we're going to use it. We're going to continue to use it because it describes our view of AI, and it's a good view of AI. But it was interesting for me to hear that, oh, although they are bought into the concept, we're not bought into the term.
So they're willing to call them AI agents, but they're just not agentic AI. Okay, well, fine, sure. One of the things, by the way, before we skip that. One of the other things that I think is really important. So they announced 4 agents. I just lost him here. Boomi Answers, which is sort of their conversational piece. The Data Detective, which is doing data classification. Some other things. Design Gen, which is building integrations, and Scribe, which is documentation. Again, love that it's so pragmatic, really dealing with their specific, how to apply it to their specific thing. But really notable is that it's also an extensible layer that their partners are building, can now build on top of this, and others can build on top. So I think that it's this really interesting approach that is, again, very pragmatic on actually solving real issues. So I find it hilarious that they are for some reason hesitating with the term. I actually don't think it's that fuzzy. I feel like most people still haven't even heard it when I talk about it, but I think sometimes you live in the bubble, so to speak, and you think that
Mhm.
you sometimes lose that perspective. But well, good stuff. I'm really excited, and so there was good energy in the room. Their customers seem to be reacting positively.
Yeah, it was a relatively large show for them. I believe about 9,000 people showing up, and they made a big deal of it. Of course, Denver was a nice location, a great change from the normal Vegas or Orlando trade show cycle that you normally see. And honestly, I think customers were excited to hear that there was more to happen here, because so many iPaaS solutions get stuck on saying we are just going to be connectors, your 200 or 300 connectors for your major applications, and then we're really not going to do much there except build some recipes or workflows or a little bit of magic on the front end to make you feel a little better. But
Well, and you know, my whole business really is I help organizations help with their messaging and talk more strategically to that CIO buyer and what have you. And I think they nailed it. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that now suddenly is extremely relevant. I mean, one of the challenges for data integration is the CIO pays attention only if they absolutely have to, right? It's not a value. It doesn't feel like a value generating thing, and yet we all know it's absolutely critical to the flow and to be able to execute. And so it's like a thorn in the side, and this sort of elevates it where it's starting to talk about it much more strategically. And so like I said, I you know, definitely I feel like that Roger Ebert, and you know, he's just going, thumbs up for this one.
thumbs
I
up.
thought that was
Yes.